Hi there, everyone. Welcome to this product management Google mock interview. My name is José, and I used to be a product manager at Google, where I conducted many interviews.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Rose, and I used to be a senior product manager at Google. When I was at Google, I interviewed 100 plus candidates. Jose, back to you.
So the question I have for you is, let's imagine that you are CEO at Uber. You just became CEO at Uber. Congratulations. What would be your strategy for the next 10 years?
Okay, so let me make sure I understand the question. So now I am the CEO of Uber, and what I'm trying to do is lay out the 10-year strategy of Uber, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about the market situation at Uber that maybe is demanding a new CEO?
Yeah, it, as you know, like Uber has struggled with profitability. It's a very competitive market. There's no specific situation. It's more a hypothetical scenario, but yeah, it's a very new industry. So I'd love to know what your thoughts are for the next 10 years.
Okay. And is there specific things that you want to look for out of this 10-year strategy?
I want to make sure that you stay high level. So, like, what are the big pillars that you see? It's a very long time frame, but want to understand where you'd place the bets, right? Like, where you would put investments to accomplish that strategy. So, go to a second layer of maybe high level tactics that you use or investments where you put.
Okay, great. So what I'm going to talk about is I'm the new CEO of Uber, and I'm going to talk about the next 10 years of strategy, understanding that Uber's had some challenges with profitability, with some market traction, probably in line of COVID, and then maybe lay out some key pillars that are going to be key investment areas that Uber should invest in to achieve that 10-year strategy.
I want to highlight two great things that Mark did here. Firstly, he asked open questions that encouraged me to give him more information about what I was looking for. He also summarized what he heard and played it back to me, getting confirmation that he was on the right track.
Okay,
Correct.
So let's go ahead and get started. So as CEO of Uber, first, I want to confess I'm brand new to Uber. So I don't know everything about Uber, but let's start with some assumptions about what Uber is. So one is Uber seems to be in the transportation space. It started that way. It started that way as an alternative to taxis in Silicon Valley, where it was a mobile app that allowed users to go from A to B, and they can summon cars magically from their phone, and the cars would come to them and take them wherever they wanted to go. And it was a much better solution than taxis. And since Uber has grown nationally, now they're global, and it looks like they're expanding in a number of different areas, like Uber Eats and Uber Delivery and another number of different Uber products. And so the question is like, okay, so how do we see that 10-year vision? How do we see that 10-year plan? Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take about a minute and I'm going to write down how I want to approach this problem, and I'll come back with how I want to approach the problem and kind of walk through it. So give me 1 second. I'll be right back. All right, great. So let's get started. So first of all, in the new COVID world, I used to love to get up in front of a whiteboard and write everything down. But in this new world, what I'm doing instead is I'm going to take this great sheet of paper. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to write down all the notes on this paper. And then what I'm going to do at the end of the exam is I'm going to turn around and show you my notes and kind of show you the work that I did, so to speak. Okay, so how am I going to structure this problem? First is, as CEO, I'm going to come up with a mission for the company. I'm just going to invent it on the fly, and that's going to be fun. So I'm going to come up with the mission of the company. And then what I'm going to do is try and understand Uber's market through a strategic analysis. And in this case, I'm going to walk through Porter's 5 forces, which is a classic market analysis. So I'm going to walk through competition. I'm going to walk through customers. I'm going to walk through suppliers. I'm going to walk through substitutes. I'm going to walk through the threat of new entrants. And then what I'm going to do based on that analysis is I'm going to come up with a summary. And then what I'm going to draw from the analysis is a number of key pillars that emerge. And that really is going to be the 10-year strategy that we rest on. And then what I'm going to do at the very end is debug it a little bit, because at the end of the day, we're trying to make a 10-year strategy in 25 minutes or less. And there's going to be a lot of things I'm not going to talk about. So I'm going to talk about the things I didn't talk about at the very end, kind of throw some darts at my own solution. Okay, so let's create a mission for Uber. So I think the mission for Uber should be to be the way you move. It's very simple. And I want to extend what they're existing doing, right? So I want to think about, it's not only about moving people, right? About getting me from A to B, but potentially it's also about moving things, right? And they're already doing this today, but I want to be very, very high level about, we want to be the company that helps deliver to be the way you move. Okay, and so everything I'm going to talk about then, it hopefully should build up to that strategy, and we'll battle test to see if that actually works. And actually, let me add to that just a little bit more. So within that mission, I want to have some key consumer tenets that I want to build on, which should be obvious, but I want to be specific about them. So one is, just what the Uber brand is built on. First, it should be fast and convenient. 2, it should be safe. And 3, it should be environmentally conscious. So we should think about those things as we kind of build our strategy.
One of the key pillars in product strategy questions is articulating the vision, as Mark did here. He was able to put an ambitious mission in simple words, the way you move. He also put the user at the center when he connected the mission to his customer principles.
Okay. So first part of the strategy, competition. I'm going to take a look at some obvious competition and also non-obvious competition. So again, if our goal is to be the way you move, I'll think of the kind of classic competition, right? We've got things like Lyft in the category. If you start to look internationally, we've got other people in the same category. But actually, I think there are other players which are even more interesting competitors. I think Google is a really interesting competitor to Uber. Google has their, I think it's a Waze? No. Yeah, Waze.
Waymo.
Sorry, Waymo. They bought Waze. They have Waymo, which is their autonomous cars, which I think is a really interesting technology. There's also Cruise in this space. There's also Amazon in this space. There's also FedEx in this space. So when you think about like how you move things and how you move people, there are actually a number of competitors. And when I look at what drives those competitors, one, they tend to be really big companies, right? Google, Amazon, tremendously well-capitalized companies. So we are competing against the big dogs. And so we need to take some bold steps. And if you kind of scratch the paint on Amazon and Google and companies like that and where they kind of find their strategic strengths, they are in areas like AI, right? In machine learning, in mobile app development, right? And so I look at those as kind of key themes. We'll kind of put a pin in those, right? There's an old expression that football is a game of inches, and I'll say AI is a game of gradients. And the company that's going to win in any space is probably the company that has the best AI. So when I look at competition, I look at some competition like Lyft, and I think that's interesting. But when I look at like bigger competition, like Google, like Amazon, like Cruise, self-driving candidates, they're really, really interesting companies, and they're really based on AI. So I'm going to take AI and mobile as big key tenets. The next thing I'm going to look at is customers, and this is really the power of customers. Uber is in a really interesting space, or actually any transportation company is in an interesting space, where historically it's been a taxi cab, and taxi cabs have historically been very fragmented local companies. Oh, you're in San Francisco, call San Francisco taxi cab, right? But it's a completely different company in New York, and different company in Kansas, different company everywhere. And that's actually given Uber a lot of its strength. And so there's a key learning there, which is the more customers the platform has, the more powerful it is. The less customers it has, the less powerful it is. So if I look at the power of customers within the strategic roadmap, I can say that the key pillar that Uber should build on is a mass consumer offering. Network effects compound greatly for Uber. And there's a second part of that too. So one is around just the network effects. There's a second aspect to it, which is the importance of being a global brand. And Uber's already seen this. If you travel internationally, if you go to different markets, you'll notice that different markets don't all have Uber, right? That's because Uber is only able to start in one place at one time, right? They started here in the US. Meanwhile, other companies have done a really good job of being like the first Uber, right? They saw Uber and they basically copied their model and were able to get significant market share. Why is this important? For a 10-year strategy, Uber really needs to be the way you move, and this really should be globally. And in order to do that, they're going to also need to internationalize. That also means they need to either go into these local markets and compete, or potentially to, or maybe also to acquire companies as well too. So they're going to need a strong capital base in order to do that. So out of customers, I'd say the key driver here is really strong network effects and key global distribution. Okay.
So let me
Yes.
ask a question there. Because I definitely agree on the network effects.
Mm-hmm.
Want to double down on that global distribution, because a lot of those network effects about moving, right, are local.
Mm-hmm.
So why is that important to be that global brand? Like what?
That's a good question. It's important for two use cases, I believe. So first use case is for people who are local but travel anywhere else, right? For example, I recently had a trip to Singapore. Actually, it was Singapore. Yeah, anyways. So I went to Singapore. Singapore, Uber is not the way you get around in Singapore. And it's very frustrating because I had to download another app and another currency, and it was a pain in the neck, right? But that's one use case. It's for people who travel internationally, and that's actually not the biggest use case. However, there's another use case, which is around, hey, if this is about transporting things, then this is about the ability to transport things from A to B, and that might very well be across market lines. And so having that international connected market is really, really important, right? So if I want to send something, I have a family that I converse with in Ukraine, right? If I want to send them to something, I'd love to be able to send it to Uber, but if Uber's not in Ukraine, I can't do that, right?
Got it.
So I think the world is going internationalization. I think that's important. Okay,
makes sense. Thanks.
So moving on from customers, now on to suppliers. Suppliers is super interesting in my mind. And this is the threat of suppliers. That is the power of suppliers have over your business model. And in this case, Uber has a major strategic weakness here. And that strategic weakness actually is it's also its biggest asset, which is its drivers. So today, the drivers don't work for Uber. This actually is a really interesting problem. It's an interesting problem because if you look at any Uber driver, what you'll see in their car is two things. You'll see Uber and Lyft, right? They don't really work for Uber. They work for both companies. They really work for themselves. So this is a major problem that Uber has in their supply chain, which is that they actually don't control their destiny. They don't control their drivers. They don't own any of that. They rent it, which means that anyone else can rent it as well too, like Lyft and any other competitor. So what does that mean? It means strategically, Uber needs to make investments to start owning their supply chain so that they can be more vertically integrated and have a differentiator in the marketplace. So how do you do that? This actually comes back to some of the competition and investment too. So there are companies like Waymo that are investing in autonomous cars. And the nice thing about autonomous cars is you don't have people in them. You own cars, and the cars take people from A to B, and that's a really useful thing. So I think this is just a key insight for Uber, which is to start owning their supply chain and to start making investments not only in AI, but also autonomous driving. And the investment in autonomous driving is going to help them move so they can actually create their own supply chain by actually owning their own car network. Okay. Now moving on. Threat of substitutions. This is an interesting one also, but a light one. So if you think about the threat of substitution in this space, it's really things like taxi cabs and things like that. And that's actually what made Uber grow in the first place. And it's actually unlikely, in my opinion, that people would go back to taxis unless taxis became radically cheaper or a radically better way to go, or somehow they all had a mobile app. So there is a risk of substitution, and there's other substitution is people can get around in other ways, which is I can get around on bicycle, I can get around on mass transit, but the reality is those modes of transportation haven't evolved in the last 50 years, and they're unlikely to do so in the next 10 years. So I don't think they're that interesting. However, I do think that there's a major risk of substitution in moving things, right? And this comes back to the competition as well, too, right? So if we get into moving things, which is about moving objects and parcels and non people around from place to place to place, the threat of substitution becomes very, very real, because there could be other providers you could use, like UPS or FedEx or Amazon, to move things around. And so this is an area that you'd want to focus on to make sure that potentially you'd have lower margins, or you'd have other devices so that you'd have the most compelling solution, so that you could execute on your vision and your substitutes aren't that great, and it's not that great of a business to be in, right? Just more of a commodity business, and they wouldn't have the ability to market and all of those sorts of things. Okay, so the key takeaway there is actually not a lot on the driver's side, because again, it's taxis, but the key takeaway on the thing side is to make sure that you have a really competitively priced product, so that you don't have a threat of having a low price competitor come in, a low price substitute come in. Okay, new entrants, threat of new entrants. So who are the new entrants in this space? So I see two new entrants. One is really interesting. One is a little less so. A new entrants is everything happening in blockchain today. So I'm sure you're familiar with DeFi, which is decentralized finance. I could actually see something happening in this space also for transportation. Let's call it DT, right? So potentially there's a role of DT in the space. And the question is, how could Uber compete against that? How could Uber reduce that threat? And the answer to that is it's got to build a kick-ass product, right? Like it's got to build a product that just works so well that the centralized nature of it is much better than the decentralized nature of it, right? So this puts a focus on you've got to have a high-quality product that's loved by everyone. So I think that kind of and it's also the things we talk about, fast and efficient, things like this. So basically, the strategic takeaway from this particular item is that it's got to be high quality and well managed. Okay, and there's one other piece too, one other potential new entrant, which is Hyperloop. Hyperloop's interesting. This is Elon Musk's new idea, which is building tunnels through the earth. And actually, I'm really excited about this idea. I think it could be a great way to do transportation. But right now, it's very point to point, right? It's about Las Vegas or Chicago or someplace in Dubai. And actually, I think those are great things. I think that this is a new technology for Uber to consider, but I think it's unlikely to be a major impact in the next 10 years. I think 20 or 30 years, really big issue to think about. But in the next 10 years, it's probably much further. So in terms of strategic takeaways, I'd say take a look at it, be aware of it, but nothing really action planned.
This is the meat of a product strategy question, where you talk about the trends that will impact achieving your vision and where you need to invest. Mark used the Porter 5 Forces framework effectively, deriving at least one key insight from each Porter force. One alternative framework you could use here is listing different options and their pros and cons. But whichever framework you choose, make sure it's simple and easy to understand.
Okay. So now let's do a quick summary of where we are and what kind of key pillars we've derived from that. So again, we've looked at competition, we've looked at customers, we've looked at suppliers, we've looked at substitutes, we've looked at the threat of new entrants. What have we built from that? So one is our 10-year plan has to be a plan that rests strongly on AI. It rests strongly on autonomous driving machines, autonomous cars. From a consumer perspective, that it has extreme, network effects, right? So that we really want to get everyone on this platform. And then it needs to be a very high quality product as well. So these are kind of the key pillars we're going to rest on, and the key investments we're going to make. If you think about it, is obviously continue to make investments in mobile, and we're going to double down in AI, and we're going to double down in autonomous driving. So there we have it. There's our 10-year strategy. Now let me debug this a little bit. So we've gone through a very complex problem in a very short period of time. The question is, what didn't we talk about? So there's a few things we didn't talk about. So one is we really didn't talk about what consumers think about Uber. We didn't talk about brand. We didn't talk about all the local markets. We didn't talk about, hey, maybe there's a next emerging Uber coming out of Iceland. Who knows, right? So we didn't go into a lot of detail there. We also didn't go into a lot of detail on M&A strategy. I'm sure there's lots of really interesting companies that Uber could acquire along its journey to get into local markets. Actually, also, I'm sure there's a lot of really interesting companies that Uber could acquire also in the technology space, right? I know Uber has had nascent, let me call it, initiatives in self-driving, which I don't know if they're still doing or not, actually. But that could be also a key area for acquisition, right? Maybe Ford and those guys give up on Cruise, and Uber comes in and buys Cruise as an example. And the last piece we really didn't talk about. We talked about a 10-year plan, but we didn't really address margins in a significant way. I always like to think that great businesses exist at the intersection of demand and profitability, but we didn't talk about profitability. We didn't talk about margins. I just presume that if we made a great high quality product that people love, that you could command a reasonable price and have a good margin and have a sustainable business. So far, Uber has made a good product, but they're not profitable. And so clearly that needs to change. And hopefully that can change in a way that consumers value and is also valuable for the long-term business. Okay, questions?
And and it was also a conscious decision of not being profitable, right? So I think they could get there at potential expense of growth. So I really like the way that you lay down this. Mark was able to summarize the strategy in less than a minute, which is always a great sign. Also, it's important to be proactive about pointing out the things that you didn't have time to focus on. And Mark did this very well. So of the things that you mentioned, AI, autonomous vehicles, network effects, high quality product, which one do you think it's the most important to get right? So understand those are four bets. Which one is the highest allocation of your budget, effort, product managers? Where to go?
That's a good point. So if I look at some of the original kind of key tenets I laid out at the very beginning, which are around fast and efficient, safe and environmental, right? I would probably put fast and efficient at the top of that list, right? And so, because that's why users would choose Uber in the first place. It's like, look, I can get there fast and efficient. I can do it on my mobile app. I think that my first investment would be in AI. First and foremost, I think that's going to be the primary first experience is I want to use an app. I want to get there. I want to get there, in a fast and efficient way. And I think the app and the AI behind that are the clear winner there.
Got it. Give me one example where that AI, what do you see as AI? Like what would be like Uber like in 10 years that AI investment will change?
That's a good question. So I think the AI could change in a lot of different ways. So today, when you call an Uber or you call or where you want to move a thing, you actually have to tell it a lot of things, right? You have to say, oh, I want an Uber Black or an Uber this or an Uber that. And you have to go through all these things. I think that the best AI really anticipates your needs. And the best AI really kind of thinks for you. So in the future, you're like, get me an Uber, and one comes, right? And it comes to your expectation of your context and being and where you want to go. And maybe it senses like, oh, you're with 5 friends, so I'm going to call a bigger one by mistake. Or, oh, you're going on your wife and you're clearly onto a nice restaurant, so I'm going to get an Uber Black. Or maybe like, oh, you're just going like, from here, you're going from here to Home Depot. Let me get you an Uber truck. So instead of an Uber Black, so you can get your rake or a piece of plywood or whatever it is that you want to go get. So I think the AI is not also about getting from A to B or getting your package from A to B or getting your items from A to B. It's about understanding the context that you're in to be smart about making those decisions. So you're getting there fast and efficiently with the services you'd expect.
Right. I guess I think original vision for Uber was like press a button, get a car. I think what you're saying is you don't even need to press the button; the right car will show up. Which is
that wouldn't be nice
cool.
just to be like you walk out of the office and then your car just shows up, right? And it says Mark right on the window. I'm like, sweet, I'll hop in that one.
Mark was able to bring back his customer principles to drive the prioritization. It is very important to put the users front and center when you have to prioritize. That's great. Cool. Maybe to close us off, so you're painting a vision where over like moves everything, right? It's moving. They already started a bit of that shift, but I think you're expanding much more. What do you think should be the North Star metric for that Uber, right? Like now you are defining these pillars. What is the main metric that you want to grow over the 10 years to track that the accomplishment of that vision?
Got it. So the main North Star metric. So if we want to be the way you move, I think the metrics got to be around that, right? So I might call that and usually metrics are usually best on a monthly basis. I would call it the monthly move units. Like, what am I moving monthly? And that's going to be my North Star metric, right? If I'm moving 1 billion things a month, that's much better than me moving, 500 million things a month. And so the more things I'm moving, probably the better my business is and the more healthier I am. So that would be my primary metric, is my monthly move unit. MMU.
MMU, I like it. A North Star is a way to measure your progress towards your strategy. Should be simple, easy to track, and should measure your progress over the long term. Mark's answer checks all those boxes. Cool. This was all. Thank you, Mark. This is the end of the interview. You did a great job. Thanks for all the great answers and questions.
Great. And Jose, I know it's a lot of work grading a Google interview, and I know now that we're done, you've got to take all the notes down and write it down and analyze how this candidate did. So I just want to thank you in advance for taking that time. I really appreciate the time with you. So thank you so much.
Of course, thank you. Well, I hope this interview was helpful for everyone watching. Both Mark and I are coaches at IGotAnOffer. So if you want help prepare for your upcoming Google interview, feel free to book a session with one of us.